If I'm Zion, I'm absolutely sick right now. You might only get 9 shots a game with Jordan Poole running point guard. A lot of people were shocked for the return for Jrue Holiday. I was not one of those people. The market had interest. This feels like the best team KD has been on since the 2019 Warriors, and it's not even close. From the Suns side of this, it's tough because they did have better offers. Darius Garland was offered from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Rudy Gobert, Dante DiVincenzo, and a pick was offered from Minnesota. There was only one way out of this mess. It was to trade. Let's get it. Welcome back to another edition of the Hampton Show. Joel, how are we feeling today?
I'm feeling great. There's been a ton of trades going on in the NBA, and there are some teams that got significantly better, talking about the Hawks and the Rockets, and some teams not so much. I can't wait to talk about it.
Same here. Today we are grading every single one of those trades Joel was talking about. Next episode, we're going to do that exact same thing for free agency. Joel, I know we spent like 35 minutes last week on the Desmond Bane trade, so we're going to skip over that entirely. So let's get into this week's first trade. Kevin Durant to the Rockets. For the Rockets, I got a lot to say. We're going to start with them and then get into the Phoenix Suns. This feels like the best team KD has been on since the 2019 Warriors, and it's not even close. I look at that Brooklyn team. I know they had 3 All-Stars, 3 All-NBA caliber players, but Joe Harris was their 4th best player in the 16 games that those 3 guys played against each other. Now, in Houston, KD's 4th best teammate can be Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün. Depending on the night, any one of those 3 names are going to be the 4th best guy on this roster. They have the legit depth piece to it as well. In an NBA where that is needed more than anything, their first 3 guys off the bench are going to be Tari Eason, Steven Adams, Cam Whitmore, buying a lot of stock in him right now. And now Reed Shepherd is going to have an opportunity to get real minutes as a 9th man. And he doesn't have the pressure that a top 3 pick would most likely have. Dylan Brooks, I get, he's a pesty defender, but he's been under 42% from the field in 2 of the last 3 seasons. Jalen Green hasn't shot above 43% in his entire career. Meanwhile, KD is one of the most efficient basketball scorers we have ever seen in the entire NBA. This reminds me at a much lesser level of OKC giving up on Josh Giddey last summer. They give up on Josh Giddey, get Alex Caruso, and it changed their entire season last year, and that is why they were able to win an NBA championship this week. On a much bigger level, you're able to swap out Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks for Kevin Durant, and it was 1 first-round pick involved. I don't think Houston, with as many guys as they have on their roster, needed those 5 second-round picks. This feels like an A+ for them all the way around, and they already have top 3 finals odds, and I completely agree with it. How do you feel about it, Joel?
This is an A+ trade for the Rockets. Kevin Durant fulfills the biggest need Houston had, and that was evident in the playoffs. A go-to scoring machine that can go out and get a bucket whenever he wants. Because in the first round, their peskiness and their defense and their rebound and that double big lineup, it took the Warriors to 7 games despite being inconsistent offensively. And you trade Jalen Green, who was their first option as a scorer, who was their leading scorer last year in the regular season, but he did it inefficiently, and the on and off numbers don't show that he was all that impactful for the team. You swap him and Dylan Brooks, whose defense and leadership and toughness will be missed, but for Kevin Durant, who still, in my opinion, is a top 10 player who can go out on any single given night and give you 30, rebounds the ball well, is a good passer, and he's also a good defender, so you still keep that defensive identity intact for Houston. And just as of recently, they re-signed Fred VanVleet to 2 years with $25 million per year. I think that's a really solid deal for him. I don't think the Rockets are done just yet. I think they're going to make a couple more moves to add spacing to this roster. But Kevin Durant, with a defensive infrastructure, with good players around him, with an all-star next to him in Alperen Şengün and an ascending star in Amen Thompson, I think the Rockets have a real chance to make some noise in the West next year and compete with OKC.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the VanVleet part of it as well, because they didn't let Steven Adams even touch free agency. They got his deal done as well. So that double big lineup will be a problem again next season. From the Suns side of this, it's tough because they did have so many better offers on the table. Darius Garland was offered from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Rudy Gobert, Dante DiVincenzo, and a pick was offered from Minnesota. Warriors offered Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, and picks at the deadline. KD, because he had 1 year left, was able to shut all three of those deals down. He picked Houston, and it feels like they had to bite this bullet. Now, if they don't at least try to reroute Jalen Green, it's a massive mistake, and we can talk about that at a later time. But feels like the Suns' hands were tied, and I'm going to give them a C for it.
The Suns' hands were tied. I think, despite that, if you're looking at the optimistic viewpoint of what they got back, the so pick tonight, we'll see who they draft. I think they're locked into a big man. I think it's Kaman Malawach, or it's another defensive-minded big. Derek Queen is intriguing, but he doesn't bring defense, so that's why I don't know if they'd go that route. But the 10th overall pick, we'll see who they draft tonight. Dylan Brooks is a good defender, and he can be the heart and soul of a team. We've seen that with the Grizzlies and with the Rockets. Jalen Green is the only part of the deal that I don't like, because I don't think Jalen Green is an efficient player. I don't think he impacts winning at a high level. Although he was on the second seed and he led that team in scoring in a regular season, I thought that team was spearheaded by their defense, and his inefficiencies cost them a lot. So I thought him being in the deal made no sense because of the redundancy of the shooting guard position on the roster. They have Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Jalen Green now on that roster, and I don't want to see Devin Booker play point guard again. I feel bad for Devin Booker. I think it's time for Devin Booker to demand a trade, but he loves Phoenix so much he doesn't want to leave, and I understand staying loyal to a franchise, but Devin Booker is one of the most premier and gifted scorers in the NBA, and he's had to change his game and play like a point guard, and that has taken away from his greatness as a go-to scorer, as a shooting guard, not having to worry about setting teammates up. That's held his game back, and that's why this past season, it felt as if he had a down year because he wasn't allowed to play with the freedom that he's played with in years past. We're talking about a guy in Devin Booker that just a couple playoffs ago was 2 wins away from an NBA championship, an NBA Finals appearance, in where he dropped 40 points in 2 games in that NBA Finals. He has shown that if you build a competent roster around him, he could take you and lead you into a deep playoff run, and the Suns are just not going to give him any chance of doing so. And since he's been drafted by the Suns, he's went through 5+ head coaches. He's went through a variety of different roster constructions, and that entire 6-year period when he first was in Phoenix was a rebuild in itself. They only became good when they got Rubio in the bubble and then Chris Paul after that. And then this Kevin Durant trade has set the Suns back into another rebuild. And I'm just looking at this situation and I'm saying, Devin Booker being 28 years old, does he want to go through another rebuild with how good he is right now? I don't think it's the best thing for him. And as a basketball viewer, I don't think it's the best thing for fans that want to enjoy the game and want to enjoy his greatness, because he's being wasted away on a team that has no plan and a team that's led by an owner, Matt Ishbia, who's made a ton of impulsive decisions.
Yeah, we said in the spring there was only one way out of this mess. It was to trade Devin Booker. So not only should D-Book want to trade out, they should want to trade Devin Booker, despite what he says. Nobody in their right mind thought that a 37 or 38-year-old Kevin Durant, that return for a guy who's not only getting traded at that age, but is asking for a boatload of money, that return was not going to save you and be able to just retool around Devin Booker. And it hasn't. Now that it's happened, you mentioned the point guard responsibilities he had last year. I felt like I watched Team USA in August, and I watched Devin Booker have to have those same defensive responsibilities for the Phoenix Suns. And that, to me, is not fair to him, because when he is at his best, like you said in 2021, he was going out there free-spirited, knowing he was the number one option, knowing that, yes, he has to defend, but he doesn't have to be the primary great defender night in and night out with Tyus Jones by his side and Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal by his side. I think what they have done has not been fair to Devin Booker, and we'll see how they get out of it. But like I said, the only way out of this is a Devin Booker trade.
Yeah, I think with Devin Booker, he's done a lot for the organization. And if he want to stay, if he wants to go, I wouldn't be opposed to either decision that he makes because it's his decision at the end of the day. I think that the Suns really messed up with their mismanagement of the valuable assets they had on the team and retooling around Devin Booker again. The Kevin Durant trade, I don't have much of a problem with. I had a problem with the Bradley Beal trade and the DeAndre Ayton trade because when they traded Chris Paul for Bradley Beal, they didn't just trade their locker room leader, the presence, a player who can still make an impact despite being older. They traded for a player in Bradley Beal who didn't fit alongside Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and they swapped a ton of their first round picks in that trade. They gave Washington a lot for a player that was on the worst contract in the NBA, and we all knew it back then. But the DeAndre Ayton trade doesn't get talked about enough because when they traded DeAndre Ayton, they also traded Tumani Kamara to the Blazers, and they got back Grayson Allen and they got back Yusuf Nurkic. Nurkic, who now, by the way, is on the Hornets because he was so awful for the Suns that they didn't want to keep him. And Grayson Allen, with all due respect, you can find a Grayson Allen in a lot of different places, and you don't have to trade DeAndre Ayton, who I think is a top 15 center in the league, despite not living up to first overall pick expectations, and a player, Tumani Kamara, who just made an all-league defensive team. I'm thinking about the Suns in a hypothetical scenario where they still have Chris Paul, they have Booker, they have KD, they have Kamara, they have DeAndre, and I don't think that's a terrible team. I actually think that's a team that can compete. But because they mismanaged those assets, it has led to them being in this situation where the roster now makes no sense, and they had to trade Kevin Durant because this roster was going nowhere. So that's where I just feel like the Suns really dropped the ball in that regard. The return they got back for Kevin Durant, I think it's like a D. I think it's a C minus. All in all, I look at the Suns and what they have to do next. They just have to hope they hit on their draft picks. I know they have the 10th overall pick and the 29th overall pick in this draft. And as for Kevin Durant and his decision to continuously lower the price so Phoenix doesn't get a big return, he had all the leverage in the situation because he was on an expiring contract. He wanted to pick his own destination. His three teams were the Heat, the Spurs, and the Rockets, which makes me think that it was more of a financial income tax decision, and he wanted to go to a place where he didn't get taxed on his money. But I also wonder, this is a theory that I had, I also wonder if he didn't want to go to Minnesota, not because of the tax reasons, and that could be the reason, but maybe he didn't want to go to Minnesota because he saw what his presence did to Devin Booker when he went to Phoenix. Because although Kevin Durant's a great player, he took away shots from Devin Booker. And it was more of this was Devin Booker's team, and Kevin Durant became the leading scorer on the team. And he's the best player because he's better than Devin Booker. And I think it took away from Devin Booker's greatness. And maybe Kevin Durant, being somebody that wants to see players flourish, he didn't want to take away from what Anthony Edwards is building in Minnesota, and he didn't want to take away from his game. I make a comparison to the 2007 season when the Nuggets had Carmelo Anthony and they traded for Allen Iverson. And in 2 years, we realized it didn't work. And Chauncey Billups was a much better fit next to Melo. And it's not because Iverson wasn't a great player. It was because he was a score-first player, and he took away from the Nuggets' young star at the time. So I wonder if Kevin Durant, a big reason he didn't want to go to Minnesota was because he didn't want to do what to Anthony Edwards, what he did to Devin Booker. And he wanted Edwards to flourish and not have to worry about sharing being the guy on the team.
And he could have learned that basketball lesson too. I mean, Minnesota's deal was Rudy Gobert, Dante DiVincenzo, and a pick. If you remove Rudy and Dante from that team, how good is Anthony Edwards, Kevin Durant, and Julius Randle as a big three in a free agency market where you're going to have to make a decision on Naz Reid? You're going to have to make a decision on a ton of these guys that Minnesota has. So maybe he just learned that basketball lesson. Going back to the deadline, he can say that he just didn't want a midseason trade. I don't buy it. I never bought it. I think the reason he didn't want a midseason trade is he wanted to dictate and do exactly what he did so he can say, you're not even going to have a year and a half or a year and 3 months with me. You're just going to have 1 year. That's how I can dictate where I want to end up. And he finally got what he want. Cam Johnson, him being included in that Phoenix deal, I think is something that needs to be mentioned as well, because I'm like you. I didn't hate the Kevin Durant deal. If you had a chance to go get him, I'm glad the Suns went and got him. I just don't understand why he was included in that deal. And because he was, they were a first round exit a couple of years ago against Minnesota. You're right, though. The Bradley Beal took them from a first round competitive, not even competitive playoff team, but just a first round playoff team to completely non competitive and out of the play in. Speaking of the play-in, team that's looking to get in it next year and possibly in the playoffs is the Portland Trail Blazers. They traded for Drew Holiday, gave up Anfernee Simons in return. Let's start with the Celtics side of things. A lot of people were shocked for the return for Drew Holiday. I was not one of those people. The market had interest. Shams had said multiple teams were involved in calling for Drew Holiday. I always felt like the perfect fit for him was Dallas. I didn't know if Dallas could make the money work, but Nico Harrison has banged this drum of getting a veteran point guard when Kyrie's out to put next to Cooper Flagg. I thought that would be the biggest contender that could offer the biggest package for him, but it ended up being Portland. Brad Stevens just played this one smart, drove up the price because he saw the market. On paper, they get a guy who's 9 years younger, who's cheaper, averages 20 points per game, and they can move off of his deal if it doesn't work out. It falls off the books next summer. This opens up so much cap space for that big 2026 retool summer that they've been dreaming about. I think that's what this is about, and it's an easy A+ for Boston.
I think this trade specifically, because we're going to talk about the KP trade later, the Drew Holiday for Anfernee Simons and the second round pick trade. The Celtics, I think, get an A for this. Anfernee Simons is a really talented player, a gifted offensive scorer that I'm interested to see how he'll look in a winning environment. Granted, I do believe the Celtics could stay afloat a little bit. If injuries start to derail this season, I think they'll shut guys down. But for the most part, I think he'll make an impact because in Portland, he's been averaging 20 points per game over the last 3 seasons, and he shoots 8 to 9 threes per game. It fits Joe Mazzulla ball perfectly. And the best thing about this deal was for the Celtics to shed salary. And really, they just saved about $5 million in this deal. Even after this deal, they were over the second apron. But you get off of Drew Holiday's contract for 2 years after that. Yes. And that was the most important thing for them. As for the Blazers, after January 1st, they went 25-25. They were 6th in defensive rating. Drew just improves their defense. I think he will stay in Portland. And Anfernee Simons was one of the worst defenders in the league. And with him being gone, that now opens up 18 to 20 shots per night. That's going to be spread around everybody else. Scoot Henderson now has a chance to build off of his second year and start at point guard with Drew Holiday. Denny Avdija showed some flashes of being a breakout player. Donovan Clingan was one of the better defenders in the league, even as a rookie. And Toumani Camara made the all-league defensive team. I'm looking at a starting 5 of Camara, Drew Holiday, Denny Avdija.
Oh, wow.
Ayton still starts, and maybe Clingan, and off the bench, Jeremy Grant.
Holy shit.
This is a team that can make a play-in push, and they're just trying to...
A what push?
A play-in push.
Okay.
They're consistently trying to get better, and I think Anfernee Simons being off the team and replacing him with Drew Holiday, you now have a veteran that's not going to step on the young guy's toes. And the Blazers right now with this move made it abundantly clear. We didn't view Anfernee Simons as a long-term piece. Our guys are Scoot Henderson, Denny Avdija, Toumani Camara, Donovan Clingan, and Shaedon Sharpe. Those are our guys.
Just to be clear, I was not laughing at Denny Avdija. For the contract he's on, he's had an incredible season last year. I was laughing at the Scoot Henderson part of it. So one of my biggest partners, BetUS, the rep that I have for them, he is a Blazers media guy. He does a post-game show for them. I text him about this, and he just replied, I don't hate it. It's just the weirdest move I've ever seen. He was happy to move on from Simons. That's what Blazers fans wanted. They wanted to hand the car keys to the guys that you just named. But he brought up Drew Holiday's contract, just like you did. He said it was brutal. And we're talking about a play-in push, like you said. 3 years, $100 million left on Drew Holiday's contract. It goes up every single year. So in that third year, in 2027, he has a $37 million player option at that same age. Even if Portland, it goes as planned, they become not even a play-in, but a playoff team next year in this Western Conference somehow. Now Drew is taking up 20% of the cap. And that's what GMs are looking at now. They're not looking at how much dollars and cents. They're looking at percent of the cap. I don't know if I want a 37-year-old potential backup point guard at this point making or taking up 20% of my cap. And I'm so tired of hearing about this strong finish for Portland. I get it, but people are acting like this team finished 20-5 or hell, even like 15-10. Their last 25 games, they went 12-13. Simons.
That's solid.
That's solid. Okay. All right.
Cool. It is. It's for them. I thought the Blazers looked really good. They went on a winning streak last year after January.
Yeah, but we're not talking about a guy that's raising their roof from 12-13 to 20. We're talking about a 35-year-old Drew Holiday who has 3 years, $100 million left on his contract.
I understand the contract is bad, but I'm looking at the Blazers right now, and their payroll is not filled with a lot of players in 26-27, 2 seasons from now, because this upcoming season, they still have to pay DeAndre Ayton.
They won't be able to pay their young guys because they have a 37-year-old taking 20% of the cap.
They will. I'm looking at 26 and 27. Jeremy Grant is under contract. Denny Advia is under contract, and Drew Holiday. Everybody else has a team option. And in 27-28, I think they'll be fine. I don't think this hinders the Blazers' chances of paying their young players. I think they'll still be able to pay their young players. I do think the decision is a little bit questionable when it comes down to paying Drew Holiday and Jeremy Grant, because it's not just Drew, it's Jeremy Grant as well. Jeremy Grant is on a big time deal, and Jeremy Grant is getting paid $36 million up until the 27-28 season, and Drew's going to be getting paid $36 million. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah. That's exactly what concerns me, because you look at the percent of the cap too. He's 20%. So now you have 40% tied into 2 non-all-star players, a 37-year-old Drew Holiday and a 33-year-old Jeremy Grant in the year 2027. That's the problem with this. I'm not saying they won't be able to pay their entire bunch of young guys. I'm just saying, like, all of them at one time, it's going to be very, very hard from them in 2 years, because Drew Holiday is not going to be a tradable contract. Jeremy Grant hasn't been a tradable contract since they signed him to that 5-year, $160 million deal. So them two together is what makes this so hindering. Simons still averaged 20 points per game. I understand that, but they were 6th in defense with him on the roster. I would have just let him. Yeah, yeah, they are better, but I would have just let him walk next summer instead of taking on Drew Holiday's deal where we have 2 non-all-stars taking up 40% of the cap. I would have let him walk. That's why it's an F for Portland.
I think that I'm going to give Portland a C, because I think they're still outs. DeAndre Ayton's contract is expiring, and then Donovan Clingan will take the reins. So is Robert Williams' contract. It's expiring after this year as well. And I look at Drew Holiday, and right now, it doesn't look like a good value on his contract. And he looked worse in the playoffs. But if he plays well for Portland this upcoming season, let's say he stays for the entire year, and next year he's playing good basketball, any team that's trading for him is like, oh, he only has 2 years left on his deal. We can maybe risk it. He becomes more of an enticing asset. Like, I think Drew Holiday can still be traded for more right now than Anfernee Simons could have gone for. And that's what I think Portland tried to pivot towards.
Exactly.
I think Portland tried to pivot towards, we traded Anfernee Simons because the market for Anfernee Simons was not there, but the market for Drew will be there. They could potentially, at the trade deadline, if a team is desperate enough, they could get a first-round pick for Drew Holiday back. So I think they're just in the mode of collecting assets, and I don't think that a couple players on the Blazers' long-term future secured. DeAndre Ayton could be a trade candidate. Robert Williams could be a trade candidate. Drew Holiday could be a trade candidate. So I'm looking at the Blazers having multiple different avenues to approach this offseason.
I would have just liked it so much better if you broached this subject in February, when Anfernee Simons has 3 months left on his deal. Maybe his trade value looks a little bit different. And if it doesn't, then you don't have 3 years, $100 million left with Drew Holiday, and 3 years over $100 million left with Jeremy Grant. That combined, I think, is what's going to hinder them for years to come.
He's a veteran, and he brings something to the locker room. Like, I think the Blazers, if they were paying players, I would agree. But Denny Advia for the next 3 years is under one of the best contracts in the NBA.
Yep.
And they're not going to have to pay most of their young players up until that point. Like, if they have to pay their young players, like Scoot, Tamani Kamara, Shaden Sharp, Klingon, that means that those guys have developed into some really damn good players.
Exactly. That
So
means they're
that
going
would
to have
be
to make
great
a
news for
decision.
them.
Yeah, it would be great news for them until they go and look at the salary cap sheet and say, oh shit, we can't pay all of the guys that deserve to be paid because we have Jeremy Grant and Drew Holiday on the books.
They will. I mean, Jeremy Grant per year, they'll be able to pay all of them.
Okay. All right. We'll move on. Let's talk about the Pelicans and the Washington Wizards. Pelicans swap CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole. The Pelican side of things, this screams Joe Dumars, the guy who ruined the Pistons for a decade and a half and somehow got hired by the league to find John Morant for doing finger guns. If I'm Zion, I'm absolutely sick right now. You might only get 9 shots a game with Jordan Poole running point guard. Plus, we talk about years remaining. Poole still has 2 years, $65 million left on his contract. CJ's deal was going to come off the books next summer. It's a D minus for New Orleans. How do you feel about the Pelicans?
I think it's a D. It's a kind of a borderline F. This trade felt like the weirdest trade made so far. It didn't make much sense for both sides. It made more sense for the Wizards, and I understand where their mind is at. But for the Pelicans are the most talented bad team in the NBA. Every year, their roster on paper looks awesome. You look at the roster right now: Jordan Poole, DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Yves Misi, Jose Alvarado coming off the bench. I mean, they have talent. You can't say they don't have talent. And they have a top 10 pick in this draft, and they have the 23rd overall pick in this draft. But it just feels like no matter how much talent the Pelicans have on their team, things still don't go right for them. It starts with the leader of the team, Zion Williamson, not being available on a consistent basis for them, but it's also about the fit of the team. In no world does a backcourt of Jordan Poole and DeJounte Murray make basketball sense. And Jordan Poole is now getting paid for the next couple of years, and so is DeJounte Murray. This is a backcourt that the Pelicans are tied to. I don't think there's a market for DeJounte out there because he's coming off a ruptured Achilles, and Jordan Poole, there's really not much of a market for him either. So I'm thinking about these two players that the Pelicans are now stuck with. And if you do have the goal of building around Zion, you just surrounded him with two players who just don't fit his game whatsoever. And now what's next? Trade in Herb Jones at the right price, trade in Trey Murphy. Ironically enough, Trey Murphy is the player that fits with Zion the most. And he's the one that they might be looking to move off from because they want assets back, and they're paying Drew and DeJounte. I mean, they're paying Poole and DeJounte a boatload of money. So this was a terrible move by the Pelicans. I have no idea what they're doing. I don't know what their direction is. It just feels like they don't have a plan.
Absolutely. And that's why it was so brutal that this is Joe Dumars' first trade as a GM. They come off David Griffin, who really just had outdated policies. He had built that Cleveland championship team, but it was in a different form of the NBA where big threes did succeed. Now big threes don't succeed, and he was trying those same philosophies, and obviously it did not work. So David Griffin gets fired. You bring in Joe Dumars from the league office because he wasn't working in another front office because of how bad of a job he did at the Detroit Pistons, and eventually got fired in the mid 2010s for that. And Joe Dumars makes this move on the Wizards front of things. This clearly to me was about dumping Jordan Poole's contract. He had signed a 4-year, $120 million deal back after the Warriors won the title. Like I said, 2 years, 65 remaining on that. Getting CJ back in this deal was the secondary thing. Now they've got cap flexibility depending on what their young guys showed this season. It's a B for me.
The best thing about this is that the Wizards shed salary. That's it. Is that Chris Middleton, Marcus Smart, and CJ McCollum all come off the books after this upcoming season.
Exactly.
And they'll have over 100 million in cap space. With that being said, what are the Wizards actually going to do with cap space? Yep. Who's going to the Wizards? I mean, unless their young players take a major leap this year and there's some top end players that are looking at Washington like, hey, man, I'd be the missing piece there. Maybe I can see it, but that's such a long shot. It doesn't feel like the Wizards are close right now. And I do think that It's nice to have the flexibility, but the flexibility for what exactly? Because it didn't really feel like they're going to make any major moves anyway. I think this just signaled to me that the Wizards didn't view Jordan Poole as a long-term piece, much like the Blazers didn't view Anfernee Simons as a long-term piece. And both teams have young guards that they want to get more of a responsibility and load on offense. For the Blazers, it was Scoot Henderson, and for the Wizards, is Bub Carrington. So I think that the Wizards are still in a good position when you take into account that they have veterans in the locker room with Marcus Smart, Chris Middleton, CJ McCollum, and Kelly Olynyk. And then they're young players with Alexander Sarr and Bub Carrington and Keyshawn George and Bala Coulibaly and whoever they draft tonight. So I think the Wizards are in a good spot, and they have a good dynamic in place in which they have veterans that can clearly mature the locker room, and they have young players with talent that can hopefully soak in all of the years of experience that these players have to offer and teach them, and they become better players because of it.
And realistically, this was probably the only trade you can make with Jordan Poole involved. And if you bring back a former president of the Players Association and CJ McCollum, that's a good guy to have around all the young players you just named, which is exactly why I gave it a B. All right, let's get into the Celtics' second salary dump. It was Kristaps Porzingis. It was a three-teamer. Celtics starting there. I was shocked that they didn't have to attach a first-round pick to get rid of KP. I thought you could pencil that in for sure. This is a guy with a chronic, undisclosed medical issue. They flipped him for Georges Niang expiring deal. We talked about that 2026 offseason that they can retool around Jason Tatum. That's going to be big coming off the books. I think it's an A for Boston again.
That's all it can be for the Celtics if the goal is shedding salary. I think the return for Kristaps Porzingis was very underwhelming, and it has been underwhelming the last three times he's gotten traded.
Yeah, exactly.
When he got traded from Dallas to Washington, the Mavericks got Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. When he got traded from the Wizards to the Celtics, I think the Wizards got like a second-round pick in return, and the Celtics only had to trade Marcus Smart. And now the return is Georges Niang and a second-round pick. Now, I think that the Celtics, if the ultimate goal is shedding salary, then this was an A-plus move. But I think this was the move that told me, oh, yeah, the Celtics might be bad next year. They're not going to make the playoffs next year.
Joel.
Because the Celtics with Anfernee Simons and Jaylen Brown and Derek White in a front court of Quita and Baylor Shireman, I mean, what's really going to happen? I mean, they're going to be a little fun, frisky team, but they're not making the playoffs. And the Hawks just became a top 5 team in the East.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
They did.
At a certain point, Kristaps Porzingis is what it is. Maybe there's a reason the return has been underwhelming for him the last 3 times. Not to mention, this is a guy who missed almost the entire playoffs with some type of serious medical disease. The fact that you even got something for him and didn't have to attach a first-round pick is not underwhelming to me.
Well, they were never going to have to attach a first-round pick to him because he's on an expiring deal. It's not like you're taking on multiple years of a contract. And even when he does play, he plays at a really high level. When he's healthy and he does play, he plays at a high level. Now, I know in the playoffs...
I'm about to say, not when he plays all the time, because I know you watched that New York series.
Yeah, but I also watched last year in the NBA Finals when he flipped game 1 for the Boston Celtics. His presence and him subbing into the game was the difference in that game.
He has a medical condition now. That is the realistic thing of it. Nobody knows what it is. Hopefully it gets released, but it is a long-term medical issue that they literally did not have to attach a draft pick to. I understand it's expiring, but nobody's taking on what he makes even for 1 year with the risk that he is.
The Hawks did. And
yes.
I think the Celtics, fine. You shed salary. You're getting below the second apron. That's your goal. I also predicted that the Celtics would trade Drew and KP in the offseason, and they would look to they will look to rebuild. I think the Celtics are looking to rebuild around Tatum for next year. That's why they freed up all this cap space.
Yes.
And I don't know if they're done just yet. I think Derek White is not safe. I think Jaylen Brown is not safe.
Same
if
here.
the Celtics get the right value, they will trade them too. So yes. I'm not shocked, but I also made the take that the Celtics will make the playoffs. And I got pushback on that in other different scenarios. But listen, I think the East has gotten better, and I look at all these teams going all in. And let me talk about the Hawks now. I'm looking at Atlanta Hawks team with Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, Zachary Risache, Jalen Johnson, Onyeka Okongwu with Kristaps Porzingis, Karis LeVert bringing him back. They got the 13th overall pick tonight that they're going to use on a very young, talented player that's going to flourish with the Atlanta Hawks. And then I'm thinking about the trade exceptions they have. They have a $25 million trade exception to go get another impact player. They have a mid-level exception they could use in free agency to add another impact player. So I'm looking at a Hawks team that their top 6 looks really talented, but they're going to have a chance to add 2 talented, proven players to this roster, plus the 13th overall pick, plus whatever they have on the roster currently. So I'm looking at the Hawks, and I think they have solidified themselves as a top 5 seed in the East. And I think they're going to shake some things up. I would still have the Cavaliers over them when they're healthy. I would still have the New York Knicks over them, but I think the Hawks have played the Knicks very tough with Dyson Daniels guarding Jalen Brunson, and you know that Trae Young has had the Knicks number in the playoffs, but I think the Hawks, they might be better than Orlando. I think the Hawks, they might be the 3rd best team in the East now.
It's funny to me because you were trying to convince me of Orlando last week, and now the Hawks trade for Kristaps Porzingis, and this changes everything. Look, I like it from the Hawks' perspective. The final thing I'm going to say about the Boston Celtics is it is a miracle that they have gotten what they have gotten for Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, because once Tatum tore his Achilles, that fan base was bleak, because not only was Tatum gone, but they had to shed all of this salary, and everybody knew it. They had no leverage whatsoever, and they did it without having to give up 1 first-round pick, and now they have all of this cap space in 2026 to do whatever they want with it. I understand the cap space argument for Washington, but guys are going to want to go to Boston, to the Atlanta Hawks. I had a B for them. I'm not mad at it. This is a low-risk
plus
swing. No, it's a B. It's a B. They gave up a late first to get a guy who could maybe fit a little bit better in their system than Terrence Mann did. I think if he's on the court, I can't wait to watch Kristaps Porzingis play next to Trae Young for 13 games next year. But that's why it's a B,
a little bit better,
not an A.
Than Terrence Mann? You said fit a little bit better than
He's not going to be on the court.
Mann?
He will not be on the court. We did not see that last year, and we have not seen it through his entire career.
The Atlanta Hawks have 3 All-Stars with Trae Young, Jalen Johnson, and Kristaps Porzingis. They have a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Dyson Daniels, and they have the 1st overall pick in Risache.
You're not going to mention Jalen Johnson?
He's an All-Star for me. He's an All-Star caliber player.
Oh, he was in the All-Star. That's my fault.
And
that's my fault.
You're saying, oh, the Celtics, this is a miracle they got this much. All they did was tear down their team. Just a year and a half ago, we were talking about the Celtics as a potential dynasty. Who's gonna beat them? My goodness! And then they just tore down their team.
They sold the team, and Tatum tore his Achilles. Like, this is the only thing to do, and they did it successfully. Like, that is a miracle.
Did, but think
everybody
of the return.
knows you have to share, or when you have to shed salary, and they still give you a return. You get a 20-point per game guy to make your team at least fun that falls off the books, so you don't have to worry about it. Huh?
Empty stats. I mean, I'm looking at the return they got. Jrue Holiday and Porzingis, the ultimate return they got back was Anfernee Simons, Georges Niang, and 3 second-round picks. How is that a miracle of a return?
They sold the team. They have to get under the second apron, or what I call a hard cap now. Like, they had to do it. They had to get rid of it.
I know they had to do it.
Why would you keep those guys on the books if you have no shot at winning a title next year?
I'm not saying they should have kept them on the books.
Now they have all the money in the world.
They didn't get that much.
They have all the money in the world in 2026.
All they did was shed salary. They did not get back any long-term piece that's going to be on this roster. They did not get back.
They couldn't afford it. They could not afford to.
They could afford to if they wanted to.
It's ridiculous.
But young players' salaries are very low. Like, ultimately, they got Anfernee Simons.
You're not getting a young player for a 35-year-old Jrue Holiday with 3 years, $100 million left on it. What young player are you getting for Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, who is sick?
Well, they got a young player for Jrue, but Anfernee Simons is on an expiring deal.
Exactly.
And I don't think that he fits with Tatum, Brown, and Derek White. So
I don't either. That's why his money's falling off the books.
Be there long term.
Yeah.
So, like, the only thing the Celtics got in this deal was getting under the books. That's it. But in terms of talent, in terms of actual like valuable picks, they didn't get nothing.
Yeah, what did you expect them to get, bro? I don't understand. I'm just saying they didn't lose draft capital in the process. What young player are you getting for those two guys?
I'm just saying it's not the return they got back wasn't a miracle.
Right,
It was fine.
you just want to bitch about it. You know, come on now,
It
that's
was
crazy.
fine. It wasn't a miracle.
It was a miracle, bro. It was a miracle. Let's talk about Brooklyn. Final piece of this. Got Terrence Mann, who they could easily flip later. That was kind of the person nobody wanted to take in this deal. Brooklyn, because they're bad, they'll take his remaining money. I think it's going to be a guy who can boost his trade value just like Dennis Schroeder did. They can get a ridiculous return in February, maybe. They've been smart about building trade value in guys, and I think because of that, I'm just going to give it a B minus.
Well, this is an A plus for them. They didn't take on risk, and they got the first round pick in the trade.
Yeah.
They now have 1/6 of the first round picks tonight in
And
the draft. They
obviously,
have a ton of first round picks.
Obviously, this comes out Thursday, but I was just listening to Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated, and he was like, there's no way they use every one of those picks. So I think, tomorrow when people are hearing this, they could know, what trades and stuff they make. I really wonder what Miami is up to too, because it sounds like, yeah, they made an offer for Kevin Durant, but it wasn't anything of value. And I don't know whether this team is star hunting still or if they're just going to tear it down and go into a full rebuild. Do you have any thoughts on the Miami Heat and what they're doing at all?
They're treading water. That's all they're doing. They're treading water. They're not drowning. They're not also swimming at a Michael Phelps rate. They're just there. They're just existing. They're not very good. They're all right. They're mediocre. And that's what they're going to continue to be. And I don't think that they should have made the KD trade either. I mean, I think that they probably would have been stuck in the same position. They wouldn't have been contenders anyway. So I think all they're doing is maybe hoping for a year where they're just really bad and they get their pick and that's it. But, Miami is what they are. They're just not a very good team.
Yeah. And that's what infuriated me about the Grizzlies conversation. It was because, Grizzlies, yes, they were non-competitive in the playoffs, but this was a team who was 2 or 3 games from the 3 seed last year in that Western Conference. These other teams were asking to blow it up, like the Miami Heat. It's like they were nowhere close in a terrible conference. I would have to wonder what Bam Adebayo's value would be with 2 to 3 years remaining on that contract. Could that be the safety raft? And it's the same way for the Phoenix Suns. They were not close in that Western Conference last year. Devin Booker feels like their only way out. And I think the longer it takes for those two teams to realize that, the longer they'll just be in this, not even mediocrity, because I can't compare it to the NFL and the Pittsburgh Steelers, but just non-competitive basketball whenever it comes to a top 8 seed in either conference.
Yeah, I think the Suns are ironically enough positioned better because they have the 10th pick in the draft tonight. And I think that the Suns should do whatever they can to trade up tonight and to draft Kaman Malawach. That is what I think should happen. I think Kaman Malawach is the perfect swing player to take a chance on. He's 7'3". He's big. He has elite defensive tools. He can be an anchor on defense, and he's continuing to improve his offensive game. I like Malawach, and I think that would solve the Suns' big issues.
Me and my friend last night were joking around about TJ Salon, how bad he was, and I hope I don't know. Just with Charlotte, I think that's going to be obviously a 3 pick, and then what Charlotte does at 4 is going to be very, very interesting. I think they love VJ, and we'll see what they do. But all the reports are pointing to Hornets. If VJ is not available, that they'll trade out of it. But we'll see what happens. And by the time you guys are listening to this, you guys already know what happens. Joel, thank you so much for taking time this week. We'll be right back here next week. Normal schedule dropping Friday. It'll be the free agency episode. Super, super excited for it.
Thank you for having me on.